Thanks.
Are there any other speakers for this rezoning at this time? Just remember to please state your name and address.
Norm Ryder, Saanich. Can I have this turned off? It's radiating and I don't want it radiating. It'll turn it right off? Okay. Well, thank you, Mrs. White, for what you said there. In some ways, I really can't add to it, except there's a lot more details we can get into, and you're in for a bit of a time on it. That I know radiation in a way that more than Jeremy Johnson does. Everything he said about it, I have experienced. I have also got a brain tumor caused by it. And 20 hours of brain surgery is not fun. Trust me on that. And these towers are going to cause more problems. I was lucky. It wasn't cancer. But lying on a table for 20 hours to have your head split open and looked at, that is not fun at all. I also have significant concerns about the timing of this hearing. That when I wrote a letter to Cypress asking some questions about, primarily technical questions about what was going on, they took over a month to get back to me. I got the letter back April 10th. Now, they thought those questions were so significant, they submitted my questions to council. I have no problem with that. Their answers, well, they should have come back on me April 1st. It would have fit better, because there's a lot that's very confusing and not correct. When she said that here at this meeting that Canada has some of the best safety standards in the world, that is an absolute falsehood. That the frequencies they're using here are running around 3 to 3.5 watts per they allow 3.5 watts per square meter. Russia and China allow around 0.1 of a watt per square meter. Now, we in Canada like to think we've got better safety standards than China and Russia. China and Russia are ahead of us on this. Most of the iron bloc the former iron bloc countries are. But you get into countries like Luxembourg, Switzerland, they're even lower. And there's a lot of discussion about whether the numbers they're using are correct. And here Canada, and when we get into the 5G, we will allow 10 watts per square meter coming off of it, which will be, you see the numbers written also different ways. It'd be 100 times more than what Russia and China allow. So to say we've got the safest standards in the world, I don't know how someone can dream that up. You can see it in hard numbers that is not a correct statement. But getting into their answers. Now, well, before I do that, when I did find out about this hearing by riding along on Lochside Trail, seeing the sign there last Saturday, I haven't had time to prepare properly. And somewhere along the line, if they've got over a month to prepare, and I've got 3 days to get something ready for a hearing, it's not quite, shall we say, playing by the rules. Also, there are a number of houses in the area that should have all been notified of this hearing, and I did talk to some of the landowners. They were not notified of this hearing, and it has the feeling of trying to sneak this through before anyone knows what's going on, and that really smells. But we'll look at these first of all, just go through the questions here a bit. At the 2130 to megahertz, that's getting close to the temperature, or not the temperature, the frequency that heats water the best. Your microwave oven operates at 2500. Now, I appreciate one tower is not going to cause a problem, but if it's heating up water vapor, what is that doing to global warming? I've never seen a study on that, but I keep wondering, just all this energy going out everywhere, it's got to be doing something. And heating up water vapor could exactly be what it's doing. Now they do have the LTE 700, which is at 746 megahertz, that different frequencies act differently, different modulations. I'll get into that in a minute. But different frequencies, such as this, the 700 range, and while the lower the frequency, the more it has the ability to penetrate solid objects, including concrete walls. I'll leave that up to your imagination, what it will do to your body. The others penetrate too. Now, I asked about the pulse rate and the frequency modulation. Well, Dr. David Blackman did studies years ago and found that some frequencies and some modulation patterns cause more damage than others. He didn't test for the ones they're using. They probably weren't even used at that time. There's some 21 different forms of modulation that can be used in certain circumstances. Why am I concerned about can output be controlled remotely? There are too many examples of somebody saying that cell tower is over the safety limits. They call in Industry Canada or Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada. Industry Canada is easier to say. They call them in, it gets tested, and the numbers are all down. But the person that tested the results, or before, tested it when Industry Canada was there, saw the numbers were down, and as soon as Industry Canada left, the numbers went back up. So this ability to control it remotely, you have no idea what they could boost the radiation considerably, and no one would be told. No one would have warning. I mean, people like me would probably feel it more. And yes, I do feel the radiation in this room causing, as Jeremy Johnson said, brain fog, etc., which makes this very hard. I'd appreciate it if in the future you would accommodate my physical disability. Okay, how many channels on each? What a lot of people don't understand with frequencies, I'm not sure this is correct actually, but you saw the frequency band that they have there. What they do is they divide that into channels, and each channel has to be considered as a separate transmitter. So it's not the frequency band transmitting, it's channels transmitting, which even at 3, you're looking at 3 times the amount that when you first read it, what is being transmitted. Well, the bandwidth is related to that. What is the maximum licensed maximum power in total for all the antennas and channels? This, I find it a very strange number, because when you look up the top, each one of them is operating at 69.3, yet when all of them are together, it's still 69.3. Well, obviously you add that together. But also, when you start looking at dBm, what is dBm? Well, that's a scientific number that really means very little to most people until you convert it back into watts. And that is over 8,500 watts. Now that's getting up there. Now, give you something to compare 8,500 watts to. The maximum your cell phone will radiate at is around 3 watts. Usually doesn't, because it's got advanced power control that dials it down so your battery lasts longer. So it's usually running down 0.1 to 0.3 watts, your cell phone. It's also why you should never use your cell phone in a car, because you're essentially in a what's referred to as a Faraday cage, and it's harder for the signal to get out. That when your cell phone is typically under 3 bars, if you have to use the cell phone, turn the thing off, because it's boosting its power up. And they have found, this is more in Europe, that farmers that are in rural areas away from the cell towers there are coming down with more ailments than the ones in the city. And it's directly attributed to their cell phones are radiating at a higher intensity. Jeremy Johnson mentioned, how many of you have read your cell phone manual? And if I can, I'd like to ask, how many people have read their cell phone manual here? It's got a section in there that tells you how far away to hold it from you. I totally disagree with the numbers, because it's to comply with Health Canada Safety Code 6, which is frankly gibberish. And it's telling you to hold it an inch away. Well, if the manufacturer is telling you to hold it an inch away from your head and body, what are they really telling you? Think about it. I mean, they're admitting it can be harmful. Now, it's one thing that I'm really concerned about, no future public consultation, that they have admitted they're in talks to put more transmitters on there. What's that tower going to be like in the end? That, in a sense, asking what the current plans are is almost meaningless, because you can be almost guaranteed by the time it's up there will be more antennas going on, and council will have no say in that. The public will have no say in that. And speaking about the tower in general, that it's going to be painted dark on the bottom and light on the top. Well, I think council does have a say in saying that many areas of the world, they are erecting trees. Some places, obviously, it would be a bit of a joke here to erect a tower that looked like a palm tree, but we could certainly do one that looked like a fir tree, and there has been some very nice ones that are actually quite hard to tell apart when you're at a reasonable distance away. If they're so worried about aesthetics, at least ask for a tree cell tower that it would somewhat fit right in, still be taller than the others, but there's always one tree that's taller than the other ones. And the 5G is a very serious concern that they say there's been no research done on it, or very little. And I have a tendency to disbelieve, but I will say that because the military is using it and experimenting with those frequencies, those exact frequencies, as a weapon, you can be darn sure that in their classified documents, they've been doing research on 5G, and they know it is harmful to people. So even the thought of 5G anywhere is going to cause a lot of problems. And for those that have to be current with the latest tech, even the IEEE is beginning to question, which is supposedly the top body in North America anyways on it, is beginning to question whether 5G will deliver what it says. As I say, I wouldn't own a cell phone anyways, but I certainly would not waste my money on a 5G, because I think you're going to be disappointed in what you get out of it. It's not going to be there. They are already working on 6G. Now, there was a little bit mentioned earlier about insurance, that in the presentation I gave to council a couple of years ago and included it again in the letter of 2017, I discussed some of the insurance issues and the problems for the entire wireless ecosystem. And that goes from the landowner through the consultant, the provider, the municipality. They all had their hands in it, that the evidence is there. They cannot say they didn't know it was a potential to be harmful, and the lawsuits are going to start to fly. As a matter of fact, I'll bring that up in a minute. Now, when I asked about the size of the near field and intermediate field zone, this document that they cite doesn't answer those questions one little bit. It's pointless. Those, if you want the answers to, you should go to Industry Canada. They at least provide calculations in a simplified form. The antennas they're putting up are a complex one, and Industry Canada says that calculations of what the radiation pattern is, they can't be done. They have to be done for complex environments in the field once it's operating. So they can't tell you what the radiation is going to be yet because it's not built, and I hope it never is. Now, near field and intermediate fields, this relates even more back to the 5G with the higher frequencies, will be a much larger area. It's a complicated formula, and I won't get into that at the moment. In the near and intermediate field, the radiation pattern is characterized by spectacular peaks and valleys of intensity of radiation. And when you get the modulation in there, it's changing all over the place, and you just can't calculate it. The closer you get to the far field, the more it stabilizes. And part of that has to do with the magnetic and electric field isn't orthogonal until it gets out to the far field. So you can get massive spikes, and we're talking, Dr. Robert Klein, in his book, I haven't been able to get the reference to what he based it on, up to 100 times a greater intensity of radiation. That this becomes a problem, and it's a problem not so much for the house underneath, because they're outside of the beam pattern. They're basically stand below and the beam's over them, no problem. It's the people when you get half a kilometer away that are in the beam pattern. And it's for that reason that just rezoning a small little area so the pole can stand up on, it's affecting a much greater area, that a much larger area should be zoned. This is not an aesthetic thing, is the house pretty or whatever. There's nothing like that. It has an impact much further. And a concern in an agricultural area is the impact on primarily the bees and other insects. Now, yes, there is a number of things they're dealing with, but they're also dealing with, and they've proven that essentially if you put a cell phone on a beehive, it's like when the bees take off, you push the reset button and they don't know where home is anymore. So that is a problem. And well, it wasn't actually Albert Einstein that said that without bees, mankind will starve to death in 4 years. It was a Canadian epidemiologist in the 1940s that actually said that. The sentiment is true, and it may only be 3.5 years. It might even hang in there for 4.5. Doesn't matter. I mean, it's once pollination stops, we're in serious trouble. That so much of our food is pollinated by insects of various forms. How will the interference from the tower antennas and other known local sources of radiation affect the propagation pattern? Well, the answer that they're dedicated frequencies and there will be no interference is wrong. There's no way around it. There are harmonics coming off of all of radiation. There's reflection from, in particular, things like steel roofs and who knows what else, what's going on. There will be interference, and that is the reason why Industry Canada says that on a regular basis, and also when any adjustments, such as when they, from the office, change the power level, there should be someone coming out and testing the radiation pattern. It's not done, and that is one area that I do feel that council can insist that they get copies of that in compliance with what Industry Canada says. And I didn't bring those standards in, but they basically every 6 months, and any time anyone touches it, basically is what it is. Now, the anticipated radiation at a distance, that one of the scientists that I've been in communication with, and there's a great many others, I mean, he's just one, says that 0.1 of a milliwatt per square centimeter does cause DNA damage. Now, I don't know if he's got the lowest number or not, but this is a scientist over in Sweden, is very well respected in the field. So that becomes a real concern. And as I say, that when they're talking about 2 meters above ground, well, 2 meters above ground at the base of the tower is meaningless. 2 meters above ground, half a kilometer away, well, depending how they've got the antenna focused, that's where the radiation is. So most of this, I sort of shake my head and wonder just what they're talking about, because they clearly aren't recognizing the radiation pattern. That is why I asked question 14. What is the radiation at a distance from the tower? It's not the answer to question 3. It's another number. It has to be. There's just no way around it. I hope they're telling the truth on the use of the Hawaii equipment. I imagine most of you heard about security issues with that equipment, and I sure hope they're not using it. They say they aren't. Now, the pattern, I didn't calculate it, 65 degrees of a parabolic cone. This goes back to dB gain and the whole discussion, that every 3 dB gain is a doubling of the concentration. Now, that I estimate is about 7.5 dB gain. So the numbers that they're talking about in radiation would be increasing by over 6 times, which starts causing me to wonder. Now, I am concerned about this lease contract because there is growing evidence. More and more people are becoming aware of the problems with cell towers. As a matter of fact, give you some information on a appeal that to the IRAC committee, which is World Health Organization subcommittee of the UN, which in 2011 said that radiation, all of the radiation we're talking about here, is a group 2B carcinogen. They have now decided they are going to relook at it as a high priority to reconsider whether it should be a 1 or a 2A. There's not really a discussion about leaving it a 2B. They're from a probable to it does cause cancer. Now, that becomes quite an issue, that if it gets raised to a group 1 carcinogen, which is entirely possible, and a great many of the scientists I've spoken to agree that it should be, then what is council's power and ability to say, get that cancer-causing thing out of this municipality? You don't have the authority after you've given them permission to build it. And that, as I say, I'm virtually certain it will be raised to a group 1 carcinogen. And if nothing else, how about a moratorium on any cell tower application, any wireless application whatsoever, until after this UN World Health Organization has a chance to review things. And one of the documents they will be reviewing is, there's actually nothing new in the document. It's just very interesting that it was paid for and sponsored by the U.S. government, the National Toxicology Program. And they did a test, a 2-year test, to find out what a typical cell phone around rats for 2 years would do. And you may laugh at rats, but apparently they are quite similar to us in a lot of physiological conditions. A lot of people act like that, but that's beside the point. And they did find, in particular in the male rats, they were getting a whole body dosage at levels, so I recall, about 1/10 of what Safety Code 6 allows. Now, the rats got a tumor around the heart, in the schwannoma cells. Now, that particularly affects me because I got a massive dose of radiation that around my vestibular schwannoma cells, and that was the tumor I got. It wasn't over the whole body, fortunately. So it is known and it is proven. This study has been replicated. More countries are replicating it as well, and the results are coming back the same, that radiation at the level a cell phone is causes schwannoma tumors that it just gets so wound up when people don't seem to understand. These are serious health issues. I'm not talking about the cancers it is known to cause. I'm not talking about the DNA damage. In DNA damage, even if you're not planning on kids, your DNA has to be able to replicate properly just for you to continue to live. It's not strictly for reproduction. And if the Freedom Mobile has a long-term contract, and I understand these contracts are written rather interestingly, Freedom Mobile can cancel the contract, but the landowner can't, which doesn't strike me as particularly fair. How would Freedom Mobile respond if neighboring individuals near the tower accuse Freedom of private nuisance? Well, I can tell you that there are lawsuits now. Got an example, a little bit of information on a lawsuit in Vermont where the property owners got $1 million in their court settlement. So people are establishing problems. And radiation levels down as low as cell phones, courts are awarding damages. Not very often. There's getting to be more and more of them. I probably hear of a new one once a month. I didn't bring examples of that in. Now, I asked about humans being electric human bodies made of a vast network of interactive electrical components. And they don't agree with that. Well, I just brought one paper on that. Yeah, basically one paper on that. Morphology of human sweat ducts observed at an optical conference tomography and their frequency of resonance in the terahertz frequency region. Now, what this is, if you read the paper, what it's saying is that your tips of your sweat glands work as an antenna, bringing this terahertz radiation in to your body. So it does penetrate. It doesn't stop at the skin like they try and tell you, because your sweat glands are basically holes, if you want, and it takes it right in. Well, David Carpenter, when I was discussing with him, and I have over the last 8 years discussed with many of the bright luminaries in the field, including him, he sort of laughed at the idea that anyone would think it doesn't affect the human body in a lot of ways. And once again, as I say, Safety Code 6 refused to look at the papers that were submitted by peer-reviewed scientists. And the National Toxicology Program basically proves that their answer to 22 is, or 21, sorry, is totally out to lunch. Well, I will agree that Safety Code 6 does not reference body voltage, but that is important. That we should go back a step here, that we talk about watts or watts per square meter. Now, watts is energy, watts per square meter is power. But your most familiar experience with watts is your classic 100-watt light bulb. And there's no such thing actually as a meter that can measure watts. What they do is they measure, sometimes make calculations based on things, but the electric field, or the electricity, and or volts, if you want to put it that way, and the amperage or magnetic field. Now, most of you are aware of that little phrase that you ran across in physics of working out that volts times amps equals watts. Well, this is exactly what we're dealing with here. Well, they didn't answer question 23 at all, that if it's affecting your DNA, it is having an excitable reaction with your tissue. Question 25, well, where they're putting this is in a works yard. And WorkSafe BC, not that they enforce it, as a matter of fact they run from it, but a Group 2B carcinogen is only to be used under restricted circumstances on the work site. Now, what will happen to that employer if WorkSafe BC decides to enforce that 2B carcinogen rule? And if it goes up to 2A, it's even more so. Well, DDT, lead, diesel fumes, etc. are all Group 2B carcinogens. All you have to do is look at the monograph from the IARC. So they are the same classification as radio frequency. It's in there too, under Group 2B. One of the Western countries that studied it the most and seems to have some of the best earlier research, haven't seen much lately, is Sweden. And they have recognized that people such as myself should be recognized with a functional impairment caused by radiation. It is, the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal says it is an impairment that should be accommodated. And come back to, appreciate you turning it off in here. Now, has the municipality, the landowner, been advised of no insurance available to protect from liability radiation? Well, somewhere in here. This is a 15-page report of various comments, including pointing out that Lloyd's of London and I think Swiss reinsurers are not insuring against radiation damage. I sincerely doubt that the municipal insurer, whatever they call themselves, does either. Now, I'll read a bit of the paper here for you. Insurance companies do not want to insure electromagnetic radiation because it is simply too risky. And please see on this webpage the reports, etc. We'll get that. It may take 2 more decades to know if electromagnetic radiation, radio frequency energy, is a significant liability issue for telecom companies. So in turn, insurers are treating the risk as cautiously as a down power line after a storm. Now, the long latency period for the tumors to develop in many cases is what got me. I was zapped with radiation that caused my tumor in 1972. I was 20 years old at the time. The tumor did not manifest itself enough that it had to be dealt with. I can see signs now that it was there a lot earlier, but until I was 50. It took actually 29 years before the issue developed. Now this is consistent with all forms of radiation, including radiation that they had over in Hiroshima, etc., where many of the tumors didn't develop until 30, 40, 50 years later. Now, what are you condemning people to 20, 30, 40 years down the road if you approve this tower? Well, the Swiss Rezoning report, unforeseen consequences of electromagnetic fields are categorized as having potential impact of high in this report. This report highlights 26 new emerging risk themes, and they go on there. They compare it to what happened when people finally woke up about asbestos and realized that is a problem. Trust me, asbestos is nothing as bad as this radiation will be. I did refer to this, and I keep reminding you that the 130-page document with a lot of references that have actually submitted it to you twice, is part of this submission, and I would ask that you read it in its entirety. That only takes up to 2012. It does not deal with things like the National Toxicology Program report, but that's one of the new things that have come out. I actually wonder about the validity of the contract they have signed or plan to sign with the landowner if they have not advised the landowner of the risk that they themselves may be held responsible for a hell of a lot of insurance claims, and they can't get insurance to cover it. Well, I didn't bring a copy of the paper in. I've got well over 3,000, so I have given you a small number of them actually. There's one paper, I think in the last couple of years, I can't remember exactly when, about they put a cell tower on the roof of an apartment building in Japan, and people started getting sick. They took the cell tower off, but they didn't, or turned it off or whatever, but they didn't tell people. And they started getting better as soon as they turned the tower off. So this suggestion that there's no problem putting it on near residential buildings, etc., I'm afraid there is. That's a serious issue. Are you aware qualified doctors and scientists around the globe are calling for stricter regulations and moratorium on wireless technology? Well, you did hear Dr. David Carpenter talk about the 5G one. That's only one. But earlier, there was another one that was, I guess you could say the lead person was a Dr. Blank. Now, Dr. Blank was from Columbia University, but I did meet him. He lived in Victoria. I met with him a number of times. Friends of mine interviewed him. You can see his interviews on Citizens Forum on YouTube, a great many other interviews from other people that know about radiation, including me. But they submitted an appeal to the UN in 2015. And we are scientists engaged in the study of biological and health effects of non-ionizing electromagnetic fields, EMF. Based upon peer-reviewed research, published research, we have serious concerns regarding the ubiquitous and increasing exposure to EMF generated by electric and wireless devices. These include, but are not limited to, radio frequency radiation emitting from devices such as cellular, cordless phones and their base stations, Wi-Fi, broadcast antennas, smart meters, and baby monitors, as well as electrical devices and infrastructure used in the delivery of electricity that generate extremely low frequency electromagnetic fields. Dr. Blank was particularly concerned about the problems around the hydro lines, but he is well versed on higher frequencies as well. Coming back to the not aware of any information on it, they go on to say numerous recent scientific publications have shown that EMF affects living organisms at levels well below most international and national guidelines, certainly far below the Canadian guidelines, so it's again, Safety Code 6 is pointless. Effects include increased cancer risk, cellular stress, increase in harmful free radicals, genetic damage, structural and functional changes to the reproductive system, learning and memory deficits, neurological disorders, negative impacts on general well-being in the humans. Damage goes well beyond the human race, so I did mention about the bees, as there is growing evidence of harmful effects to both plant and animal life. There's a number of pictures of strains that around a smart meter, the plants died off. And don't forget, I remind you, the smart meter is a relatively low powered in terms of what the cell tower is all about. Now, they go on, I won't read the entire paper to you, but this is to the UN. We collectively also request that the children and pregnant women be protected. Guidelines and regulatory standards be strengthened. Manufacturers be encouraged to develop safer technology. I believe they actually can, and Jeremy Johnson feels the same way. Utilities responsible for the generation, transmission, distribution, and monitoring of electricity maintain adequate power quality and ensure proper electrical wiring to minimize harmful ground current. Now, that's another area of the whole issue, and more to do with, shall we say, electricians dealing with it. Public be informed about the potential health risks from electromagnetic energy and taught harm reduction strategies. That is why I have presented a number of times to council to try and get this message through, because it's not going through very far. Number 6, medical professionals be educated by the biological effects of electromagnetic energy and be provided training on treatment of patients with electromagnetic sensitivity. I haven't found a doctor that can talk about it. They admit they don't know anything on it. Government funding and training in research on electromagnetic fields and health that is independent of industry, and mandate industry cooperation with researchers. Here's one that'd be really interesting. They have it. Media disclose expert financial relationships with industry when citing their opinions regarding health and safety aspects of EMF emitting technology. And this will be I liked it when she had it up there that showed no radiation in the area. That was a white zone. And white zones, radiation-free areas be established. It'd be really nice if there actually was one along the Lochside Trail.
Mr. Ryder, I apologize. As I mentioned in the beginning discussion, we will allow for as much time as members of the public require for the public hearing. That being said, we have been discussing this item for over just about an hour and a half. So I'll give you the 5-minute warning, and then if council's okay, we will recess the public hearing and then open following the regular committee meeting, just because we do have other members on the agenda.
I will say I cannot stay because of the level of radiation in here. that I have to be able to get through this as quickly as possible. And I've been doing my best
I appreciate
to
that.
cover all the points. I'll try and
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
now just sort of running through the list of signatures to this particular one. This is not the one about 5G, which is, as I say, another discussion, and many of them, I think you'll find their names on it too. Well, I can see from Australia, Dr. Mary Redmayne. Well, I interviewed her. You can see her on my YouTube channel. I'll just bounce through some of the names. Number from Germany. Number from Canada, including, I believe, Dr. Miller was the former medical health officer at Toronto. I could be wrong in that. PhD molecular oncologist from BC, Dr. Malcolm Patterson. Most of them wouldn't recognize the Chinese names. We have from Finland a number, including Dr. Darius Lazinski, who was one of the members on the committee and he actively argued for it to go higher than a 2B, but he was a member of the IRAC committee. Speaking of that, we also have the former research director for that committee, Unit of Epidemiology for Cancer Prevention from France is on here. You see that their names are relatively small, and there's quite a collection of the names here. From the States, there is, let's see, Dr. Carpenter, that's where they list Dr. Blank. From the States, is actually from England. And then there's a list of supporting scientists who have published peer-reviewed papers in related fields. We have Nobel Prize winner on here, at least one, probably more, I don't know. Now, as I say, that in the last couple of weeks, the IRAC committee has agreed to reassess radio frequency, and that's why I ask that you delay any decision until they have reassessed it, that you're jumping the gun. Dr. Martin Paul, who I understand is scheduled to speak to the Vancouver City Council, he refers to Wi-Fi as an important threat to human health. Now, it's not just Wi-Fi, it's all radiation. His paper, I just have the front page of the abstract here for you. This paper is not focused on anecdotal reports, but rather on 23 controlled scientific studies of such health-related effects in animals' cells, including human cells in culture and human beings. He's emerging as one of the very vocal ones that is very concerned about it. He was, I think, from the University of Washington. Now, I did mention the jury awards Vermont couple $1 million in a cell tower lawsuit. The town of Milton scores a victory in a cell tower lawsuit. These are just 5-minute grabs off the internet. Court rules against cell tower company. And I did mention about the sweat glands. The study of human sweat glands is helic antennas conducted by our group in Professor Fieldman's lab began looking at the images of skin created by optical coherence tomography, which revealed that tips of sweat ducts that expel the sweat from the gland to the pore at the surface of the skin have a helix structure. And he notes a 2004 study, a 2007 study, and a 2015 study, which I assume are supportive of that. This and the fact that the dielectric permittivity of the dermis is higher than that of the epidermis leads one to assume that as electromagnetic entities, the sweat ducts could be regarded as imperfect helic antennas. 2008, 2009, 2011 studies, another 2011, 2014. In the last, well, March 26th, I think it was, the news came out at California Elementary School was able to get a Sprint cell tower removed because of cancer cluster. I forget how many kids came down with cancer in the school. They weren't immediately underneath the cell tower, but they were in the beam pattern, which is something that is not really talked about, just where that beam pattern goes. It's somewhere way up there, and, well, we can't see what it's doing, so we'll just ignore what it does. As you can imagine, I could go on for a few more days if you would like. I wouldn't. I'm wearing out. But I'll just leave you with these papers.
Mr. Ryder, if you,
I'm just looking, trying to figure out what the paper is all about.
I was going to say, if you provide those papers to Mr. Robbins, they'll be included as the public record this evening.
Okay, this has a bunch of references, which I think are quite important for you. As I say, that I would really appreciate it if you would delay this until the IRAC committee made a ruling on whether it's a group 1 or a group 2A carcinogen. That could have serious long-term effects on everyone. The radiation will, but the implications of that will.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ryder, and thank you for your time you've committed to this item. Is there any other members of the public to speak to this item this evening? For a second time, members of council, Councillor Jensen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Question through you to staff. Can you confirm for us the level of notification that was done prior to this hearing in terms of neighboring properties, please?
Thank you, through Mr. Chair. The 100 meters is the notification that was done. In this case, it was 7 properties, to the best of my knowledge. These are large rural properties.
As a follow-up to that question, how long do you recall was the board?
Thank you. The sign was up in accordance with our bylaw. It is required to be up 10 days in advance of the public hearing.
Thank you. Are there any other questions of council for staff or for the proponent at this time? Seeing none, I'll call for a final time. Any speakers to this item?
I would like to come back and address that 10 days. I go by there several times a week. It was not up 10 days. It was up somewhere less than a week. I know that. I've spoken to others. They've looked for it. They said that it wasn't there a week ago. Yet we had very short notice on this.
Thank you. And for a final time, any speakers on this item? And once again, this is you're addressing committee, not the public, or council, not the public, when you're making your remarks.
Yes, I just wanted to reiterate about Safety Code 6 that is regulated by Health Canada, not ISED or the carriers themselves. And as a condition of their license, they must comply within a cumulative level of all existing sites as well. So in general speaking, it's considered very safe technology. I just wanted to address the one comment about the 2-meter height. We base our Safety Code 6 analysis on a 2-meter height because that's the height of a typical person. So we don't do it from exact ground level because I know that was brought up. And thirdly, I just wanted to say we also did our own invitation for feedback to the community and sent out notification to owners and occupants within the 100-meter radius as well. And that was done on March 19th. So property owners were notified by both the district and the applicant about this public hearing date. So,
as a question on a follow-up for you, as a subject to this rezoning, would it be possible to ask Sprint as a carrier to update the municipality if changes are ever made to the gigs of network being provided, or a better way of putting it?
I understand that you could probably write that into your resolution as you have put other stipulations forward, such as the painting and inviting other carriers to co-locate and offering that space up if they would want to co-locate in the future as well. So I believe that can be written into your resolution. There was another caveat about not cutting down the trees on the property to maintain the buffer. So I think that is a reasonable outcome that could happen.
On that note, through to staff, is that a potential covenant that could be added? Not that it would be restricted, but that the notification would be provided to the municipality at the time of any upgrades?
Through the chair, since no covenant was presented as part of this public hearing at this time, we would consider that to be a significant or significant enough information, new information that should be brought forward to the public for their scrutiny as well. Because we don't have a draft, we don't know the content, we can only surmise what may or may not go into a covenant until such time as the proponent, the applicant, actually agrees to it. So I would suggest if you're entering or asking for additional conditions, that you consider then holding another public hearing where that could be presented to the public.
Thank you. Any other comments from Mr. Councillor Jensen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess just building on that comment then, so if we were interested in such a covenant, and you say consider holding another public hearing, that's a decision we have to make now before we close this hearing. Is that correct? Mr. Robbins?
You can certainly close this meeting, and you cannot receive any additional information after you close the public hearing. I'm saying we can't create a covenant for you this evening so that you can be presented. So I'd suggest if that is what you're wanting, then you either recess the meeting, or you more probably appropriately is that you would schedule another public hearing where additional information would be presented.
Thank you. Mr. Councillor Newton.
So that if we requested additional information through you, Chair, to staff, would that be in the form of a motion? Is that my understanding correctly, so that we could then create a motion to ask for consultation if there are increases into the capacity?
Through the chair, if you are requesting new additional information that is germane, then you will need to have another public hearing after this evening.
Councillor King.
Or if I understood correctly, the other option being to recess, ask staff to have that consultation, then come back forward with the additional information, since the public hearing would not be closed. Is that correct?
Through the chair, not the most ideal, because you would need to determine the date and the time with which to come back.
Of course. However, if it were a month, that would be the sort of thing we could do. We could delay, basically freezing the situation. I understand the other option of holding a second public hearing, which is to, I guess, adjourn this one and hold another. That too would have to be scheduled.
Correct. And I would suggest that would be the preferred option, that you simply hold another public hearing should you wish to consider additional information.
Councillor Thompson. Councillor Thompson.
It was just clarification that regardless of what we would do, we would have to have another public hearing, whether it was reconvened or not, and we would have to do notification nonetheless.
Through the chair, if you recess a meeting, your notification is the notification that you provide at this meeting to when you will be recessing to. So you wouldn't require any further. I would suggest that is not the preferred option, is that you adjourn this meeting, and if you were to consider additional information, that you hold another public hearing.
Councillor Jensen.
Thank you, question through the staff for further clarification. So if we if we recess this meeting, the preferred of the options, does that option require us providing a date for the follow-up meeting at this point? I heard that was for the first option, the non-preferred one, but the preferred option, does that require us to set the date right now?
Through the chair, the only difference is in terms of the notification between recessing and holding another public hearing. You would still be considering additional information regardless of whether you recessed or had another public hearing. To be clean and to ensure that you provide appropriate time with which the public to scrutinize and council, is that I would suggest that you adjourn the meeting, and if you consider additional information, that you hold another public hearing. My suggestion and my advice to you is not to recess this meeting.
Sounds like there's an echo. Councillor King.
So I gather then I will move to adjourn, and once I do that, am I able to make a motion immediately? At what point would a motion take place to hold another public hearing? It would be at the next council meeting that you'd have to make that motion.
Is that a motion to adjourn, or is that a theoretical motion to adjourn?
I guess it was a motion to adjourn, but before I make that motion, I guess that closes the meeting, and you can't make a motion then after. So then it would be at the next council meeting that you'd have to make the motion to hold another public hearing. That's my understanding of that.
What council may wish to do is adjourn the meeting, and at the next public meeting, as you may request additional information,
Right.
which would then give rise to having to have another public hearing, which we would schedule.
That's what I thought. Okay, well, I'll move to adjourn.
Just a point of order. If we're going to adjourning this meeting, do we not have to go through the 3 calls for final presentation?
I made a
Have
call
we
for a
done that?
final presentation.
Okay, fair enough. I just wanted to clarify that.
So we have a seconder and a mover on the floor now. All in favor? Opposed? Motion is adjourned. The public hearing is now closed.